Good morning, members, and welcome to our Caucus of the Whole on Tuesday, January 9th, for the purpose of holding our annual sexual harassment prevention training. We are very lucky to have some very skilled trainers with us this morning. With us from NCSL, we have Stacy Householder and Angela Andrews. Please join me in welcoming them. Take it away.
Good morning, everybody, and congratulations on week 2 of session. You are still bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Angela and I are both former legislative staffers, so we know how this process goes. But also thank you for doing what you do every single day in service of the citizens of Vermont. We are lucky enough to get to work with legislatures across the country, and we know that your job is not easy. Which is why we're here to talk to you today about this important topic, because the legislature is a unique workplace, certainly, but it is a workplace nonetheless. And we want to make sure that we're covering this important topic so everybody, legislators and legislative staff and everybody else who uses this building to conduct business, feels like this is a welcome place to do things and that it is a respectful environment. Unfortunately, you do not need to look far across the country to see headlines where inappropriate behavior is happening. These are just a few headlines that have come across in the last year in legislatures across the country where poor conduct has been in play. So we're here to talk about some of that conduct. This is going to be an interactive training. You may remember us, we were here last year to conduct this training. You're going to hear a couple of reminders from that training last year, but we also have a lot of new material that we'd like to cover with you and that we'll be encouraging you to talk about with your partners at your table as well. Let's go ahead.
It is great. Test. Let's try this again. All right, you've had time to look at the screen. Thank you so much. We're going to start today by thinking and talking about the definition you see on the screen. I just want to tell you, I will be giving you 4 different definitions throughout the course of today's training. You'll know it's a definition because it's on a black screen, and I will most likely be reading them to you as well. So when we think about harassment and sexual harassment prevention, we want to start by talking about respect and respect in the legislature. And the definition you see on the screen is what a respectful legislature is. NCSL has worked with legislatures for almost 50 years, and we've come up with this definition. A respectful legislature is one where legislators, legislative staff, members of the public, the press, those that interface with the legislature and have legislative business, they're treated fairly. They're acknowledged in value. There's a culture of cooperation, of open communication, civil communication, and conflict is addressed early. We bring that up because your constituents, those that you work with, won't get the most out of your service if you cannot work and operate in a respectful legislature. So my colleague Stacy was here in this wonderful chamber with you last year, and she asked you this question: what actions or behaviors you can or will undertake in 2023 to promote, to support a respectful legislature? So I'm going to ask you now, think back to the last year. How have you created a respectful legislature? What's something you've done, maybe a commitment you made at the end of last year's training to demonstrate respect within this esteemed institution? Now, this is where we get to the start of our interactive time together. So I welcome anybody to weigh in and to share with your colleagues how you created respect in the House, What's an action or behavior you undertook in the last year to show respect? Looking around. I'll give you a few ideas, some examples that may have came up. Active listening. Was there a volunteer? I want you to weigh in if you're so inclined. Active listening is an example. Having a conversation with somebody that you may not agree with. Yes, sir. All right.
When I saw that they were very well, and changed some bills to short form bills and respecting their time.
Thank you. So having a recognition, there's a lot of people involved with this process, and it can be demanding. So thank you. Showing respect, thinking about how you work with the legislative staff within this chamber and within this building. Any other ideas? Anybody care to share? Yes, thank you.
I voted for a legislative pay bill to increase the pay of my colleagues.
All right, a recognition of the talent that's within this space to retain as well. Well, I appreciate you sharing. We talked about supporting each other, active listening, caring for those that were within this building. Those are all ideas of how you create a respectful legislature. And when we share this and we talk about conduct that demonstrates respect, we're talking in ideals, but hopefully attainable ideals. But sometimes there's times when there's disrespect, when there's conduct that is disrespectful. We call those derailers that open the door or derail respect within the institution. You can see some examples through the images on the screen. Talking in profanities, yelling at someone, telling inappropriate jokes, maybe humiliating someone that you're interacting with. Many, many other forms of derailers. And when we have derailers, that opens the door to harassment and sexual harassment. So it's really important to think about what can I do to demonstrate respect? And then what are some of the derailers that open the door to potential harassment, that show disrespect? So I'm going to turn it over to Stacy to talk a little bit about your policy.
The good news is that you have a policy in place. I hope this is familiar to you because you all passed it at some point in time. So I at least hope you have given it a read at some point. But if it's foggy in your memory, go back and make sure that you're reviewing the policy. We are not going to read the policy to you today. Instead, we want to focus more on how harassment and sexual harassment manifests in the legislative environment. But we do encourage you to locate that policy. We will show you exactly where we have some strange stuff going on up there. Well, we'll just speak it. So I want to be very clear that legislators and legislative staff are covered by this policy. That means that you are expected to abide by this policy that you have put in place. However, anybody who comes to do business in this building, in the Capitol, meaning lobbyists, constituents, the public, legislative staff, of course, and legislators, they are all protected by the policy. There are links to the policy on the website. You can also get them from HR. There are many people you can reach out to get a copy of the policy if you'd like to just do a quick review of it and make sure that you're up to date with any changes that might have been made. There we go.
Coming into view. It's slowly coming into view. So take a look before we move on to the next one. Thank you for sharing that information, Stacy. I'm having a little technical. Okay. Second definition today, it looks like it's coming into view, is to share with you what is harassment. And harassment is a form of discrimination based on a protected class. So race, color, religion, sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, pregnancy, national origin, age, 40 and over, genetic information, disability. Those are protected classes. And harassment becomes unlawful when it unreasonably interferes with somebody's work performance or creates a hostile or intimidating work environment. Next definition, it's up here now, sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is a form of discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Sexual harassment, and this is listed in your policy, is in the workplace is illegal, and all employees have an obligation to ensure a workplace free from harassment. Sexual harassment means unwelcome sexual advances, request for sexual favors, and other conduct of a sexual nature. When submission to the conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly as a term of employment. When submission to or rejection of the conduct is used as a basis for employment decisions. And when the conduct has the purpose or effect of creating a hostile work environment or interfering with the work environment. Another piece I want to point out, we'll look at this last part of this policy. Again, language directly from your policy. Sexual harassment is not only unwelcome conduct, but also conduct that may be personally offensive or fails to respect the rights of others, lowers morale, interferes with work, or violates a person's sense of well-being. And sexual harassment can take many forms: physical, verbal, auditory, or visual, or a combination thereof. There are examples of sexual harassment that are listed in your policies.
If you remember nothing else from today, I hope you walk away with this particular nugget of information. And that is this idea of intent versus impact. And what that means is that the welcomeness of a certain action, a certain joke, a certain comment, it doesn't matter what the intention was of the person who gave that joke or engaged in that behavior. What matters when you're talking about harassment and sexual harassment is how those things are received. How is that behavior received? How is that joke taken? And even if someone says, oh, I didn't mean it that way, or oh, you're being too sensitive, that doesn't matter. What matters is how it is received. So be very careful about what you say. Think about what you say and think about how it could be perceived by someone else that you're engaging with. Last year, we talked about this idea of categories. These categories are not a legal framework, but I think they're helpful to think about the grayness that exists when we talk about harassment scenarios and sexual harassment scenarios, because they can take a lot of different forms of severity. So I'd like to just remind you of what those categories are. Then we're going to jump into a couple of examples of how sexual harassment manifests in a legislative environment. So the first category is this idea of uncivil behavior. It's the guy who's yelling and screaming and cursing and calling people names. I dub this category one, the jerk, right? You all may conjure up an idea of someone of who that might be in this environment, right? Hopefully not. But it's the person who just creates an uncomfortable environment, though it may not be sexual in nature. Category two is harassing behavior. You start to see sexual harassment in category two. It's telling a stereotypical joke. It's making fun of someone's pregnancy. It's making comments on appearance about anybody of any gender. And it's making gendered jokes as well. It may not necessarily be severe or pervasive. It may just be one joke or one comment, but it can still be unlawful. Category three is unlawful on his face, or as you may know it, quid pro quo. Quid pro quo means, anyone want to call it out? This for that. Thank you, my Latin majors in the audience, right? This for that. It is when someone promises some sort of sexual favor to someone in exchange for something else. In the legislative environment, that could be in exchange for passing a bill in committee. It could be exchange for a vote, whatever it might be. Quid pro quo, this for that. Category four is criminal. We talk about sexual assault, perhaps a hate crime. It is unlawful on its face, and it is criminal in nature. So these categories are fluid, and situations really fall into gray areas. They all depend on the context of the situation. And I think you'll see that shortly when we jump into the scenarios here. But before we do that, I also want to point out the fact that harassment is cross-cutting. It can be man to man, woman to woman, woman to man, and vice versa. It can be legislator to legislator, staff to staff, legislator to staff, and vice versa. And it can be across the gender spectrum as well. So make sure that it can hit every area. So now we're going to have you grab your worksheet that looks like this. We have, you may remember this from last year, we're going to do some scenarios. These are 5 new scenarios. So unfortunately, it is not hard for Angela and I to find scenarios. These are all true. They all come from legislatures across the country. Legislatures have had to grapple with these situations just in 2023. So take a look at this, turn to the person next to you, have a 5-minute conversation about these 5 scenarios. The question that you're answering is this: is this harassment? Yes, no, or maybe? And if so, what category does it fall into? Go ahead.
Hardwired in. Do you want me to try this live? Share screen?
Yeah, I'm really not sure what was going on there. It looked like there may be something with the Wi-Fi.
Oh, yeah.
Saturation that was
Yeah.
causing it to.
No worries.
isolate
No
your-
worries. I mean, we verbalized it, so yeah.
general
Yeah,
understanding in the
right,
House is
and
that
of-
they can see and read.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And certainly, you know, that you guys have copies of this, so feel free to send it out. And
Okay.
yeah. Yep. All right, you've had some time to discuss with your colleagues. I hope you can see from these scenarios that often these situations bring up gray areas. It's very contextual. We're going to run through just a couple of these, but we're happy to run through as many as you'd like, especially ones that maybe produce some good conversation with your colleagues. So the first one I want to run through is number 1. Over a dinner during session between legislators and lobbyists, a legislator says to a lobbyist, "You look incredibly attractive in that dress tonight." Pause and wink. "It would sure be a shame if your bill didn't make it through my committee tomorrow." So we're going to do this by a show of hands, and this might feel counterintuitive, but if you think this is sexual harassment, give me a thumbs up. I know that might feel a little weird. If you think it is not, give me a thumbs down. And if you thought this maybe could be, you can be in the middle. And let me be clear, it is very okay to say maybe to these scenarios. That's why we're in this room. It's why we're having these conversations, because these do fall into gray areas. So thumbs up, down, or in the middle. Do you think this is harassment? Yes, no, or maybe? All right, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up with a couple of maybes as well. For those of you who think, yes, this is harassment, what category did you put it in? Lots of threes, lots of threes. We would agree with you. We would say, yes, this constitutes sexual harassment, and yes, we would put it into category 3. And again, remember, those categories are not a legal framework, but I do think they're helpful to think about the severity of situations. The reason we do that is for a couple of reasons. One, there's a pretty clear quid pro quo insinuation in this. There's kind of a pause, there's a physical gesture that may be welcomed or unwelcome behavior. There's a comment that hopefully when you read it, maybe didn't feel totally comfortable, felt a little bit icky. There's comments on appearance that could be welcome or unwelcome, and their appearance about what somebody is wearing or their body. And there's a power differential at play here. We're going to talk about power differentials in more detail in just a minute, but you have a legislator who has the power to make decisions, who has the power to make votes, who's making a comment to a lobbyist who is probably trying to advocate on behalf of one thing or another. Any questions about that one or any comments about it? Yes?
I noticed the inclusion of the detail that it's during session, and I would just ask if that was an intentional inclusion, and also add that I think it would still be inappropriate and sexual harassment if it was not during session.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. Even if it is outside of session, your policy does cover you, meaning that you are expected to abide by it, whether you are in the Capitol, whether you are outside the Capitol, whether you are in session or out of session, as long as you are an elected official. Okay, the other one I want to go through, and then I'll go through any others that you think are interesting. Number 3, a legislative staffer recently had a baby and is breastfeeding. She takes time during the day to pump. Her committee chair has started to question her absences throughout the day, though knows that she is breastfeeding, but has asked her to be in the committee room more often. What do we think on this one? Yes, no, or maybe? Okay, we are across the board on this one. We've got a lot of maybes, a lot of yeses, and some nos in here. Okay, for those of you who thought yes or maybe, what category did you put this in? 2? Okay. We would agree with you. We would say that yes, this is harassment if the comments are insinuating that pumping mother is taking absences because she is pumping. And we would also put it into category 2. And that is because legally, any employer must provide a time and space for breastfeeding parents. Even if the committee chair doesn't appreciate this or feels like this committee staffer is missing out on some things, it is the staffer's legal right to have that time and space, which is unlimited, to nourish their child. Under state law, so under Vermont law, parents have the right to do this until the child is 3 years old. Any questions about this one? It could be indiscrimination. It could potentially, again, it's contextual. It could fall under sexual harassment because it could be gendered. Yeah. Yes. That could potentially be. Typically, when you have a parent who is feeding a child, because humans are all different, it could be that some people require more time or less time. So there have been new laws that have come out that accommodate for the time that is needed. Like outside the committee time, or? Yeah, so you can certainly have a conversation with them and just say, I understand that you may need to step out X, Y, or Z times for this, you don't even have to say why, just say, I understand you have to step out. Can we meet some other time just so we can get on the same page? That is perfectly fine. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I'm just wondering where policies come into this. I mean, I would assume most legislators would have policies about this, so it would be very clear about what would be acceptable, in the committee room. So
can you just say a little bit more about that?
So there would be policies about breastfeeding.
Okay.
If you're a new mother, you would either work something out with your chair, or this is what you would be allotted in terms of time or whatever. And I can't imagine it would be each chair would be developing, a kind of policy
like
on
individual, yeah.
On that
it's
kind
a good question. I do not believe, and I'll turn to Eliza and Mike over here. I don't believe you have it's not specific in your policy that addresses breastfeeding. It's good, right? Do you want to say anything more about that? Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Per person.
Right.
And therefore the accommodation needs to be unique to that person.
So if everyone heard that, it's an accommodation that is being made for new parents. And so that accommodation can be flexible based on the individual and their individual needs. But it is not specifically laid out in your policy. Instead, it is, we've covered what the law is. Question, yes?
I guess sort of a gray area question. At what point does it potentially become harassment if the chair feels this person is really exploiting this, is doing other things, maybe is heard through word of mouth, is using time away, saying that it's for this or suggesting that it's for a valid reason, but it's actually taking additional time. Is asking or challenging that, at what point is that inappropriate because you're questioning a reasonable accommodation versus?
Sure. I think asking for a conversation for better understanding is certainly acceptable. Kind of to your question over here, that let's have a conversation so we can make sure that we're meeting your needs, but we're also meeting the needs that we need in the committee as well. If there is a concern that there is a situation where this is being taken advantage of, I think there could, potentially be a conversation where you involve maybe the staff director or something like that to figure that out before any accusations are made. Any other questions on this one? Yeah.
I don't really have a question, but I just would like to point out that this behavior ought to extend to witnesses as well.
Yes, very fair. Are there any other scenarios that produce some good conversation with your partner or that you'd like us to go through as a group? Yeah.
Thanks. I think this is actually still part of number 3. If the committee chair is noticing that the staffer who's breastfeeding is and wants to bring it up, the question that made it a maybe for me and for us was if it's a public conversation or if it's a private conversation. If the chair just goes directly to the staffer and is not accommodating based on our laws versus calling someone out in public, is that more harassment? Is that more considered harassment rather than a private conversation?
I would certainly not call someone out in public if you don't know all of the circumstances that are surrounding it. You know, I think the right place to start is a private conversation. If you have a question, about the law, you certainly have resources, you know, the lawyers at your disposal or HR is at your disposal to get clarification on what the law is. But if you believe, you know, you're making an accommodation for someone who is breastfeeding and, you know, perhaps maybe you're not okay with the way they're going about it, I would not call them out in public before offering a private conversation about that. Any other questions or any other scenarios that you'd like to walk through? Okay.
Thank you. So we've talked about what harassment is, what sexual harassment is. We've gone through some scenarios. You worked with your seatmate on that. It's important to also talk about what to do. What is your process if you experience or observe harassment or sexual harassment? Up on the screen, hopefully, Betsy and Claire, if the clerk could move. I know we're having some technical difficulties, but we're going to work through it. If you could advance the slide. And while she does that, I'll share a little bit more about what's in the policy. First, if you identify objectionable conduct, maybe you experience it or you observe it, you can approach the wrongdoer and ask them to stop that behavior or that conduct. You are not obligated to do that, however. If you don't feel comfortable approaching that wrongdoer, you have other mechanisms available to report that conduct. The first is you can report it to the appropriate panel. In this instance, it may be the House Panel on Sexual Harassment. There is a reporting process for staff supervisors. In addition, you can also report to the Office of Legislative Human Resources, an important resource within this institution. The Office of Legislative Human Resources, one of their goals is to create a safe work environment for everyone. If they receive a complaint, they're to make immediate action on that complaint. In addition, there are other resources for reporting. That includes the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Vermont Commission on Human Rights, the Vermont State Ethics Commission, and I know there's one more. Yes, the Vermont Attorney General as well. I want to point out here that we've talked about harassment, sexual harassment, but it's also important to cover what may not be considered harassment or sexual harassment or disrespect. And that is following up on the feedback or the poor performance of a staffer or maybe a colleague. That is not considered harassment or disrespect. Having a disagreement on policy, on the policies debated within your committees, within this chamber, that is not considered harassment or disrespect. That's just the normal course of working in a deliberative body like the Vermont House of Representatives. And finally, enforcing committee or chamber rules, legislative policies, that is not considered harassment or disrespect, so long as it is enforced equally.
So what is it about legislatures that can make good people behave in not so good ways? There are some risk factors that exist in legislative environments that you may not be able to change because they are structural, but if you are aware of them, you can mitigate against them to make it less likely that a harassing environment would occur. So let's run through what these risk factors are. First and foremost, there are power differentials that exist in state legislatures. Everyone who comes here, whether that's a legislative staffer coming to support you, whether that's a constituent coming to talk to you, or a lobbyist coming to speak to you about a certain bill, they are all deferential to you as the legislator. I know you are all citizen legislators. I know your spouse or your kids or your friends keep it real for you at home and make you, think that you're just like a regular human out there. But in this building, you're not. And that comes with some additional responsibility. You have to understand that people are deferential to you and that your opinion and your vote means something out there. So really take that to heart and really understand that when you're working with legislative staff or you're working with constituents or lobbyists, that they may not be saying some things to you because of the position that you hold. So keep that in mind. The second risk factor that exists in state legislatures is social events. We know that the business of the legislature gets done outside the walls of this building sometimes, whether that's at a coffee shop or at a dinner or at a reception. And this becomes incredibly problematic when alcohol is involved because people's inhibitions are lowered. They may start behaving in a way that they might not inside the walls of this building. And last but not least, legislatures tend to have younger staff around, whether that's a legislative aide that's in their first year of employment, post-school. You have a young, very cool PAGE program in place. But these folks do not have the professional breadth of experience to always know what is appropriate or not appropriate in a professional environment. So what they need is mentorship. They need help and support to know that if they feel like they're in an uncomfortable situation, what can they do and where can they go? So people who are more experienced have the responsibility to make sure that they feel like this is a respectful environment. So we're going to jump into talking about bystanders now. And this is really important in the legislative setting because this is often how we learn about harassing situations, but it is also the most ignored issue. So someone who is a bystander might turn a blind eye to something they see that is disrespectful to the institution. So a bystander is a person who is present when something happens, but is not directly involved in the situation. Bystander intervention describes a situation where someone who isn't involved in the situation steps in to change the outcome of that situation. There are a lot of reasons why bystanders do not intervene when they see an inappropriate situation, especially when it involves a legislator. We have both worked in different legislatures. We know that this is a relationship business and that it can be incredibly difficult to talk to someone about something difficult when you have spent a very long time cultivating a relationship with that person. And you may be depending upon that person for one thing or another. But I would implore you to say that as someone who is serving the citizens of Vermont, those citizens deserve a respectful and upstanding state house and the people that serve in it. So I would encourage you to say something. You have lots of different mechanisms. You can approach someone directly. You can turn to HR for support. There are other reporting mechanisms, but I would encourage you to take action to make sure that this is the most respectful place that it can possibly be. We're going to look at a couple of different
First, Stace, I want to cover a framework for thinking about bystander intervention. Stacey's talked about what it is, why it's important, especially to the institution. And she's also shared reasons why it can be difficult to intervene. And we recognize you may not know what to do if you observe offending conduct. There's a framework, it's called the 4 Ds of intervention, that may be helpful for you to use if you witness offending behavior. The first D is direct intervention, if it is safe to do so, to directly confront the person who's exhibiting that offending behavior. The second D is to distract. That is an option to distract the person that is exhibiting that behavior by either moving them off topic or moving them out of the situation. The third D is to delegate. You may not feel safe or comfortable in intervening. You can delegate that to somebody else. Sometimes maybe somebody in a more senior position, in a higher position, or maybe a staff supervisor to intervene. So to delegate that intervention. And then the final D is to delay. You may not be able to do the 3 other Ds, but after the fact, you can check in on that person that has experienced that offending conduct to see if they're okay and to move forward that way. We're going to have an opportunity to apply this. There's a case that will go on your screen to think about bystander intervention. I'll read it to you. A legislative staffer is in a conversation with a legislator and a staff director. The legislator asks the committee staffer if they are familiar with a menage a trois, and then puts their arm around the staff director saying they definitely understand what one is. If you were a legislator, as in your role in the House as a legislator, observing this, what might you do? Out of the 4 Ds of intervention, how might you proceed? So take about a minute with your seatmate to have that conversation. And I want to point out, there's no right or wrong answer, but to have this conversation and think through how you might act as a bystander to intervene, to change the outcome of a situation. Go ahead and have a minute to discuss.
Okay, I'll debrief read the new one and then. All right, you've had a minute to chat with your seatmate about what you might do. Can I get a couple brave volunteers? What tactic might you use when you see this situation as a bystander? What is one thing that you talked about that you might do? I might start pointing and calling on people. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I would just walk right up to my legislative colleague and say, hey, this isn't the time for folks to have this conversation. Try to make it a lighthearted intervention. Just bring it up. So it's sort of both.
Yeah.
And distract.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you all have relationships with one another. You may feel more comfortable approaching each other and just saying, hey, I overheard that comment. Let's not talk about that within the walls of the building, right? It might make certainly the staff feel uncomfortable. That's right. A direct approach, always an option. Anybody else say anything else? Yeah.
Sometimes just something as simple as, excuse me?
Mm-hmm.
That freezes it.
Yeah, just
But-
an exclamation of, wait a second, did I hear you correctly? Yes, exactly. Angela will go through a couple of those in a minute. Well, let's take a look at a second scenario. Again, we want to really hammer home this idea of bystander intervention because it is the thing that goes most overlooked in legislatures. A legislator is notorious for being hard on staffers, being critical and questioning of their work. One day you witness a scene where the legislator is berating a new staffer. The legislator's voice is loud and the comments are scathing. The new staffer is visibly shaken and humiliated. At the end of the tirade, the legislator storms out. So again, take 30 seconds, talk with your neighbor. What would you do? Would you employ one of the D's here? How might you address this situation as a bystander?
Okay, I know lots of conversations happening. I'm hearing that in the room. In the interest of time, we're going to debrief this quickly, but anybody care to share how might they handle this or what intervention might they do? Yes. Delegate. Yeah. I'm sorry, the representative talked about delegating. So using the intervention may be very difficult to talk to the member directly, but to talk to the speaker or another leader within the chamber about that member's behavior. Thank you. Right here.
Well, in the scenario, the legislator has stormed out. So the first thing I would do would be to go to the staff person and say, I was so sorry to hear that. I'm going to follow up. I feel really badly that you had to deal with that.
So delay, thank you for that. So checking in on that person that has experienced it. Are they okay? What might they need? How you can support them. Thank you very much. I want to, one more comment and then we'll move on. I believe so.
That legislator has a problem, which is going to resurface again and again. And I think it would be a benefit to a fellow legislator to follow them out of the room and say, what's going on? You have a problem or something. Something legislator to legislator.
Yeah, so to check on your peer, on your colleagues, see what's happening in their world as well. I appreciate you raising that. One of the things that came up when we talked through this scenario with the staff yesterday was this idea of the statement notorious, having a reputation for this type of behavior. And I want to point out here, sometimes we see offending conduct from someone. Sometimes we observe it, and it may not be a one-time thing. It may happen day after day after day. And if you think to yourself and say, oh, that's just so-and-so, that's just how they are, they're notorious, or they're just from a different era and that's how they acted. I want you to think about that. Think to yourself, is that acceptable behavior to create a respectful legislature? If you're rationalizing that behavior and thinking about that, it may be time to think about what intervention you might take to help create a respectful legislature. So we're going to move on here. That was a category 1, uncivil behavior, just to debrief it, creating a hostile work environment. Next slide, clerk, please. Should you feel safe and directly intervening? Some of those responses came up by a few of your colleagues about what you could say. You see some examples on the screen, just saying something short and sharp. That was harsh. What? Ouch, something like that to jolt out of that situation. There's a few other ideas here on the screen. It's helpful to have a stock response if you need it, or a phrase in your back pocket to help you feel confident in intervening. One phrase you could consider using: as somebody that serves in this chamber and values a respectful legislature, I find that behavior or that comment offensive. Something that you can use to intervene to help create respect in this chamber. Last definition here for you today is about retaliation. And workplace retaliation is when somebody takes negative action against someone that has either filed a complaint or supports a complaint of sexual harassment, or against an individual for cooperating with an investigation of a complaint. It's important to point out that the Vermont General Assembly does not tolerate harassment. We have one final scenario. We're going to work through it really quick. It's about retaliation. A legislator is angry that a committee assistant accused her of sexual harassment. The legislator telephones the accuser and tells her that she will get the assistant fired from the legislature and prevent her from seeking any additional employment within the legislature or the capital region. We can all agree this is retaliation. But why? Let's go to the next slide just to break this down before we end our time together. Because it's a threat of demotion. The member seeks to get that committee assistant fired, and it's a work-related threat, warning a reprimand related to a complaint of sexual harassment. We're going to end our time together. Stacey's going to share some few words.
So Angela and I understand, of course, you have to do this training yearly. You have to learn about sexual harassment. We hope we introduced a few new concepts and some new scenarios for you to think about this year. But we also hope you see it as more than just compliance, because there are real consequences for legislatures that allow harassing behavior to occur. First, for those who are harassed, it's more difficult for them to come to this building and do their job. They have higher levels of stress. They have higher an emotional toll, higher health costs. For those who are the harassers, certainly they're going to have an ongoing reputation. They're going to be known for that. They're going to have lost opportunities because of that reputation, and they could face legal ramifications as well. And then particularly for Angela and I, who make a living studying legislatures and the institution of the legislature, it is problematic for the institution, because you will not attract the best and the brightest legislators or legislative staff to serve the people of Vermont if the institution has that type of reputation. So I leave it up to you, of those who are stewards of the seat that you sit in currently, to maintain the integrity of this institution, to maintain the level of respect with each other and with the staff and with anybody who walks in this building, to do the people's work. So we will end with asking you to renew that commitment that I asked you to make last year, or make a new one. What is one small thing you can do each day you walk into this magnificent building to increase the level of respect? Maybe it's just reaching across the aisle to someone you really don't get along with and trying to forge a cordial relationship. Maybe it's taking a new staffer or a new legislator under your wing and really helping them understand who they can go to if they need support. Pick one thing that you can do to raise the level of respect in the building, and thank you for what you do every day for the people of Vermont. Thanks for having us today.
Thank you, Stacy and Angela. Members, you will receive a copy of the slide deck and the discussion guide from today. That concludes